Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Charles. We're over our technical difficulties. I'm going to turn off my screen now and my microphone so we can listen to Charles. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry for the long wait. For those who don't know me, my name is Charles Kimball. I've been recording the History of Southeast Asia podcast for the past 7 years. And as far as statistics go, I'm 64 years old, so I'm probably the oldest podcaster in the conference. And I launched this podcast in 2016. It now currently has 130 episodes. And two of my inspirations to becoming a podcaster were Daniele Bolelli and Sebastian Major. And so I'm honored to be here in the same conference as they are. And let's get on with the presentation I have. First of all, I'll tell you that I was inspired by two things to talk about Southeast Asian history. First of all, there was the main conflict when I was a kid, the Vietnam War. It was making headlines all through my childhood. And secondly, in 1985, I married a pen pal from another Southeast Asian country, namely the Philippines. And we're still together now. So that's kept my interest up in the region since then. And now here we go with the presentation. Okay. Now I was when I heard that we were going to be talking about contingencies today, I was at first I thought about military situations because of the saying that what was I going to say? The saying that no plan survives its first contact with the enemy. Well, I thought about that at first, but then I decided someone else is probably going to be talking about military examples of that. So I decided to talk about an alternative situation. And that came up with the nation of Thailand. Now I'm trying to get my PowerPoint presentation to start here. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Okay. I'm talking about Thai tactics, tricks, and diplomacy. Now, for those of you who don't listen to the podcast, I define Southeast Asia as the 11 countries between India, China, and Australia. Here's a map showing the whole region, and I'll name the countries from west to east. First, we have Myanmar, formerly Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, the Philippines, and East Timor.
Actually, so Charles, your slide hasn't changed there. Do you have to press the little green play button at the bottom of the screen?
Oh, wait a minute here. A resume share?
You're on share. Do you have to press at the bottom of your presentation? Do you have to press the green play button down at the bottom of your screen?
Well, I have to press the F5 button for the slideshow to work. Let me try. Okay.
Perfect. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, now we're cooking. I'm not I'm not too old to learn some new tricks. Okay. Now we're going to concentrate on Thailand, or as it was called before 1939, Siam. Here, I'll begin with a meme I downloaded from Facebook. Give everyone a joke to start with. Okay, everyone had a chance to read that? Okay, now here I've listed the countries according to their per capita income. Now you can see here that Thailand is not the richest country on the list. In fact, it comes in at number 4 after Singapore, Brunei, and Malaysia. I should also state that that per capita income is figured out by taking the gross domestic product of a nation and dividing it by its population. And so this is a strict average of what the people in that country make. In practice, what usually happens is that a lot of people make less than this number, and a few people make more. Now, Thailand is not the richest on the list, but I have called it the most successful country in the region because, I'm looking at it from a social standpoint. Unlike the other nations, it has never been a colony of a Western country, either a European nation or the United States. And that's why they still have a monarchy to start with. And because they've never been a colony, their social institutions have come into the modern age more or less intact, especially the monarchy and Buddhism. Also, they've been able to move at their own pace when it comes to modernization, and they've avoided culture shock for that reason. And part of the reason for their success is their diplomacy. And what I'm going to be talking about here is not the contingencies of an individual, but the contingencies of a whole nation. The Thais, on several occasions, have managed to get what they wanted, even when they were facing an opponent that was too strong for them to fight. And so here I'm going to tell you how they did it. Okay. These contingencies come in 3 categories: tactics, diplomacy, and at least one trick. Okay, now this picture shows you the ruins of the former capital of Siam, Ayutthaya. And there it's about 60 miles northwest of present-day Bangkok. Today it's a national park, which the population likes to visit. Now, Siam had an unfriendly neighbor. Okay, to tell you this story, we're going to go back in time to the time when Thailand was called Siam, Myanmar was called Burma, tanks were called war elephants, and cars were called horses. Now, Southeast Asia had a big rivalry between Siam and Burma. Now, you're probably familiar with rivalries in other parts of the world. For example, in the ancient Mediterranean, there was the rivalry between Athens and Sparta, and between Rome and Carthage. And if you go to Europe more recently, there was the ongoing feud between England, France, and Germany. Well, in the case of Siam and Burma, they fought at least 20 wars between 1547 and 1855. Most of the time, the main objective of these wars was the city of Chiang Mai. Now, Chiang Mai is in the northern part of Thailand today, right about where I have my cursor. And the Burmese wanted it too. And so the city changed hands quite a bit during those wars. And there were a few times, even in the 1500s, when Laos wanted Chiang Mai too. So you had some three-sided wars involved there. Now, for Siam, the worst of these wars was the one that was fought between 1765 and 1767. In that one, Burma besieged Ayutthaya for 14 months, from February of 1766 to April of 1767. What happened was three armies invaded Siam, and they approached Ayutthaya, each from a different direction. One from the north, one from the west, and one from the south. And then after they besieged the city, when they finally broke in, they burned it to the ground. You can see the city burning in the background and in this painting. And after the war was over, the city was so ruined that the Thais decided that it would not be their capital anymore. Instead of rebuilding it, they moved away and built a new one. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Siam survived because it had one good general left. And here's his picture. His name was Thaksin. Now, Thaksin was able to fight a very successful defensive action. He kept one of those Burmese armies from advancing for 5 months. And because of that, the king decided that he should be in charge of defending the capital. But once he had that job, he wasn't able to drive the Burmese away, and he was criticized for that. Well, he saw that it was going to be a hopeless case. So during the siege, Thaksin and 500 soldiers cut their way out of the doomed city and escaped. In the countryside, he switched from a conventional war to a guerrilla war. Meanwhile, back in the capital, the city was taken and destroyed. The king was taken off to Burma, and he was made a monk, and he spent his last 19 years living in a monastery. Now, here's a picture of one of those battles where officers are challenging each other on war elephants. Now, elephants were used in warfare in Southeast Asia all the way up until around 1875. Now, this is where the military contingency comes in. Thaksin's problem was that he had to defend a fixed position. Once he was no longer doing that, he could win his battles. And as a guerrilla leader, he's gone from conventional warfare to guerrilla warfare. He won again and again. Now, every time he won a battle, new recruits joined him. And so his army enlarged to the size of 500. His army swelled until he had 5,000 men. Now, Thaksin happened to be half Chinese in ancestry. So he thought about calling on China for military aid. Well, China gave it. They not only gave him guns and ammunition, but they caused a diversion by invading Burma. Well, as a result of this, he managed to retake Ayutthaya in a few months, and by 1769, the Burmese had been driven out of Siam completely. Now, I told you that that Thaksin and the Thais did not want to rebuild Ayutthaya. They built a new capital, Thonburi, which was 60 miles to the southeast, but still on the Miniam River. Now, this building here is the palace Thaksin built. Because he only ruled for about 15 years. He didn't get to build a fancy palace like you see in Bangkok today. Today, this building is the headquarters of the Thai Navy. And the city of Thonburi is a suburb of modern day Bangkok. There, it's on the opposite side of the same river. However, Thaksin had 4 rivals, each in a different part of the country. There was a prince, there was a monk, and 2 governors. They also wanted to be king. And this map shows where all of them were based. And here's Thonburi, where Thaksin was based. He controlled the red area at the beginning of the war. It took a 3-year civil war from 1767 to 1770 to defeat them all. And then peace did not come after that war was over. Thaksin also had to defeat a Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. In 1775, he conquered Chiang Mai again. This time it stayed in Thai hands for good. Then he defeated a Burmese invasion that tried to get Chiang Mai back. And in 1778, he conquered all of Laos. Now, 15 years of unending war was too much for the king. He went insane. He got to thinking he was a bodhisattva, which means he thought he was a saint or a living Buddha. His court put him in a monastery because he was no longer interested in running the country. In fact, all he wanted to talk about was theological issues. Now, another general from the 1760 war, I hope I pronounced this name right, Phra Phutayotpha Chulalok, he took his place as king. As for Thaksin, the hero who saved Siam 15 years earlier, was reluctantly executed in 1782. And because they didn't believe in shedding royal blood, they did it by sealing him up in a sack and breaking his neck with a club. And unfortunately, this was 100 years before Sigmund Freud was available to diagnose his condition. And so this was the only way they had to cure the royal madness. Now, here's a picture of King Chulalok. He's now remembered as King Rama I. Now, in the early 20th century, the Thais realized that Thai names are too long for foreigners to pronounce easily. So they added to each king's name the name Rama. And so from Chulalok onwards, they're also named Rama I. And the present day king is the one who's ruled since 2016. His official name is Vajira Longhorn, but you can also call him Rama X. Here I put Rama I. He ruled from 1782 to 1809. His dynasty still rules Thailand today. He moved the capital across the river. The problem with Thonburi was that it was on the same side of the river as Myanmar, or Burma, of course, as it was called back then. And he reasoned there that if the capital was on the other side of the river, the city would have an additional line of defense. And so that's how Bangkok got to be the capital of Siam today. Now, he believed in conservative reform, where what he mainly did was rebuild the country and strengthen it. And so his motto should have been, "Make Siam great again." Okay, now I'm going to tell you about that trick I mentioned earlier. If you go to Bangkok today, one of the monuments you can visit is the Temple of the Golden Buddha. And here it is. Now, here's a bit of trivia for all of you. How do you tell a Thai Buddha from how do you tell a Thai Buddha from Buddhas of other nations? It has a pointed flame on top of its head, and that represents enlightenment, just as the original Buddha was enlightened after he slept under a bo tree. When he woke up, he knew everything that he had to know about spiritual matters. Now, the temple in the Thai language is called the Wat Trimet Temple, and the Buddha is 13 feet tall. It's not gold plated, but it's made of solid gold. Now, if you just go by the bullion, the gold is worth 347 million in US dollars. And you can probably add some more from the artwork. Now, no one knows how old the Buddha is. Our guess is that it was cast in the 13th century because it's done in an art style popular at that time. Well, the Buddha was in Ayutthaya during that war in 1767. And of course, the Thais got real worried about what was going to happen to it. The Burmese soldiers were Buddhists too, but they were hacking the gold off Thai Buddhas. Nothing stopped them from doing that. So they were wondering how they were going to protect the golden Buddha. Well, because the city was under siege, they couldn't get it out of the city. And if they tried to hide it, it would probably be found anyway. So they resorted to a trick: disguise. Yes. They covered the Buddha with stucco and plaster so that it looked like a big, ugly statue. And then they moved it to an unimportant temple. And it worked. If any Burmese soldiers saw it, they thought it was just a big, ugly statue that didn't deserve their attention. Well, in fact, it worked too well. The Thais forgot it was a golden statue. And so when they left Ayutthaya to build first Thonburi and then Bangkok, they left the Buddha behind. Then in 1801, King Rama I remembered it, and he ordered it moved to Bangkok. But even he forgot that it was a golden statue, so nobody made a big deal about it. And then when a temple was built for it in the 1830s, no one thought that was a big deal either. Then when the temple fell apart in the 1930s, the Buddha ended up under a simple tin roof. Yes, there. In fact, almost 180 years went by before they found out it was a golden Buddha. And that happened in 1955 when King Rama IX ordered a new temple built for the Buddha. And when the time came to move it, they had a clumsy work crew, and they dropped the statue and knocked off some of the stucco and on it. Well, they realized, it revealed the gold, and they carefully removed the rest of the statue. And they carefully removed the rest of the stucco, and only then did they find out what they really had. Also, just as amazing, underneath the statue, also plastered over, they found a key. And with this key, they could separate the Buddha into 9 parts or lock it together again. And now that made the job of moving the Buddha much easier because they could do it one piece at a time. So if you go to Bangkok today, the Golden Buddha is in a new temple that was just built in 2010. And you can see it in all of its pre-1767 glory. Okay, now I'm going to finish by telling you the most important skill the Thais have used to get what they wanted: diplomacy. Since the first Thai states were established in the 1200s, they have been Southeast Asia's best diplomats. Okay, here's case 1. After he conquered China, the Mongol Emperor Kublai Khan demanded tribute from Southeast Asia. Well, most of the Southeast Asian countries didn't give it, so he invaded them. And how did this go? Not too good. The only country that Kublai Khan succeeded in defeating was Burma. His invasions of Vietnam and Indonesia failed. It was just too far away. The supply lines were too long, and the environment was totally unsuitable for the Mongolian army, which was mainly mounted archers. In fact, when they went for Indonesia, they needed to have a navy too, and they were never very good at sailing on the seas. Now Siam at this time had its first great king, Ram Kamheng, and Ram Kamheng was there was an outstanding leader. Today, he's mainly remembered for being a scholar. In fact, the Thais believe that he invented the Thai alphabet, but he was also a good warrior. His name means Rama the Brave. But he figured out there that fighting the Mongols wasn't going to be good for anybody. So instead of fighting the Mongol Empire, he sent gifts in 1294 and 1300. So there was no war between the Mongols and the Thais. In fact, he even went all the way to Beijing to make sure that the Great Khan received the gifts. Now here's case 2. Now, 200 years ago, Siam was the largest nation in Southeast Asia because of all those wars I mentioned with the King Taksin. Besides holding the present-day lands, they also had Laos. Cambodia was a vassal of theirs, and they also ruled the Shan Plateau and what's now eastern Myanmar and part of Malaysia down there. So they actually had a border with China back then. But then the European powers moved in. Now, the rivalry between Siam and Burma, it only ended because the British conquered Burma in 3 wars in the 19th century. So you can see the British moved in and took the Shan Plateau, and they also occupied Malaysia down here in the south. And the French came in from the east, and they took first Vietnam and then Cambodia and Laos away. Remember, Thailand was ruling, Siam was ruling Laos at the time. Well, the Siamese ambassadors played the British off against the French. They told both of them that if they left the country independent, in between them, it would be better than to let the other side conquer them. And so as a result, although they lost nearly half their territory, the core territory remained intact. And that is why in the podcast I called Siam that's why I called Siam the unconquered kingdom. Now for case 3, we're going to move ahead to World War II. This is Field Marshal Plaik's Phibun Songkram. Now he commanded the Thai armed forces, and he was prime minister twice. He ran the country from 1938 to 44, and then after the war from 1948 to 1957. There, each time he seized power in a coup. Now, he was the one who changed the name of the country to Thailand in 1939. Now, no one knew for sure where the name Siam came from by that time, but a lot of people, including Phibun, believed it was a Chinese name. So they did it for nationalist reasons. Thailand, for those who didn't know, means land of the free. Then Japan attacked on December 8th, 1941. Now, because of the international date line runs through the Pacific Ocean between Thailand and Hawaii, December 8th for them was December 7th in the United States. So Japan was attacking Thailand at the same time as the Battle of Pearl Harbor. Well, Phibun resisted the Japanese for 5 hours. Okay, he didn't fight them for months or days, but hours. And then he joined the Axis. And so officially, for most of the war after that, Thailand was on Japan's side. But at the same time, Thailand had 2 governments. There was a military government in Bangkok, the one of Phibun. It was pro-Japan. And there was also a civilian government led by the king's regent. His name was Priti Phanomyong. And they were in exile, but their main office was in the Thai embassy in Washington, D.C. There, they refused to recognize the war declaration, and so they were on the side of the Allies. Now, the king at this time was only 16 years old, and he was going to school in Switzerland. In fact, he stayed in Switzerland until after the war ended. And so he was technically with the civilian government. Though since he was a minor, he didn't really have much say in the whole business. Now, here's a picture of the Thai embassy in Washington, D.C. today. Well, by 1944, it became clear that Japan was not going to win the war. And Phibun was forced to resign in that year. Gradually, the civilian government took over, but they could not leave the war yet because there were still Japanese troops inside the country. They had to wait till Japan surrendered, and then Thailand promptly voided its war declaration against the Allies. And this picture shows the cover of Time magazine when Japan surrendered. There, the Japanese flag with an X over it. Now, the Thais had a lot to explain to the Allies, but because they succeeded, they avoided being punished for being on the side of the Japanese during the war. Now, during the war, Japan gave back to Thailand the land that the British and the French had taken away a few decades earlier over in Laos and Cambodia and Malaysia, and Burma. Well, the Thais returned those lands again to establish the present day borders. They said they had no choice, but they had to join the Japanese to prevent a Japanese invasion. And that in the past, they were always friends with the Western nations, especially the US. And the war declaration was illegal because the king and the regent never signed it. Well, the Americans were willing to forgive everything. The Soviet Union wanted the Communist Party legalized in Thailand, while the British wanted favorable trade agreements, the right to station British troops on Thai soil indefinitely, and 1.5 million tons of free rice. Well, the Americans told the British and the Soviets to knock it off. And so the other allies dropped their demands, except for the rice. And the rice was sold instead of given away. Okay, because the Americans were so generous, that is why Thailand was on the side of the Americans during the Cold War. In fact, during the Vietnam War, the United States had quite a few bases in Thailand. And then in the 1960s, when ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, was founded, Thailand was one of the original 3 members, along with Malaysia and the Philippines. Okay, I think my time is up. So sorry we weren't able to work out questions and answers.
Hey, Charles, thank you very much. That was really good. I'm pleased we managed to get you doing your presentation.
Okay.
Let me just stop your screen share. We had some people come into the chat and there's some questions for you. So I will just find them. So we had Zoe, she asked, so this is about Thaksin. She said, aside from Thaksin's heritage, what motivated China to support him and Siam? Was it to prevent Burma from gaining too much power in the region?
Well, let's see, as far as Thaksin and Chululok, I should mention here that both of them were not full-blooded Thais. I mentioned that Thaksin was half Chinese, and Chululok, most of his ancestry actually came from the Mons, an ethnic group that lives in southern Burma and Siam. Back about 2,000 years ago, the Mons were very important in spreading Indian culture into Southeast Asia. But today there's less than 1 million of them in Burma, and I don't know if there's much more of them in Thailand today. And so, in that sense, the kings of Thailand today are less than 50% Thai, if you count that, and also the Chinese ancestry. There, I learned from another podcast that Thailand's present day population is at least 30% Chinese. As far as Burma's not becoming dominant, they've had a constant problem there with a bunch of ethnic minorities that don't recognize their authority, and so although they've usually been larger than Siam, they've never been as well organized, and in fact, that's a problem in Myanmar today. Minority groups like the Karens are still in revolt, especially since the coup that took place in 2021. And one of these days, I'm going to have to record an episode on that.
Yeah, it seems that somehow in Thailand, even though there's the different groups came in and different peoples, that they've still somehow managed to keep some coherence.
Mhm.
And it's amazing that so they weren't colonized either. So does that help? The history of the country internally, has it been more protected because they were never colonized?
Yeah.
So do they have a strong identity?
Yeah, yes, I would say that. They're in fact the Thais at the beginning of their history as a nation. They realized that they were a minority in their own country, and I'm thinking now that might be why they developed the diplomacy skill.
Mm. Yes. Um, uh, is there anything else you'd like to plug or promote? Any other questions in the chat? I think that's all our questions for now. So, Charles, do you want to just tell people where they can find your podcast and listen to you?
Okay, it's called the History of Southeast Asia podcast. I kept the name simple, and it's hosted by the website blueberry.com, and that's spelled like blueberry but with no e's, BLUBRRY.com. But it's also been caught up by all the major podcatchers. There are such as Apple Music and Stitcher and Spotify and iHeartRadio, and they're just about everybody but YouTube. So I'm going to have to work on YouTube one of these days.
Right. Yeah. So if people just search for your podcast, they'll be able to find you.
Yes. Do a Google search under the name History of Southeast Asia podcast, and it pops up along with my name right away.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you very much. And yeah, I should just mess in the chat here. And Sarah saying, very, very glad that you were able to do your talk. And yeah, we enjoyed it. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad of it too. And I originally requested a late session to get the bugs out. You can believe it.
Yeah, there's always problems on these conferences, but we got there in the end. So thank you very much for persevering.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to end the call now. And so thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, thank you for attending, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Charles. Bye-bye.